whenever you get back, check the dirty break floor. No, we're over 4. We're both at 35. We're before 30. I'm really sorry. Well, I mean, yeah. I'm sorry. I haven't been seeing anyone drunk. Last summer I had the same amount, only one person dropped. So I'm like 5 over full. I really do not like it. There's just no shot this semester for me. I'm really sorry. Thanks for coming. Oh, that's great. We'll get started just a second. Was anyone in here not enrolled, still trying to add? Okay, I'll just double check. Start lecture with the thyroid. So you're looking at the thyroid gland. Well, that's the thyroid gland, the glandular looking structure. And on the picture on the left, you can see it's in the neck. Located to your neck, just inferior to the larynx. Pretty much that's the thyroid cartilage that's right underneath. Just inferior to the thyroid cartilage of the larynx. So the larynx is this structure here. That's the thyroid cartilage of the larynx. It's the largest cartilage of the larynx. It's your voice box. Okay. So I'll teach that more when we get to the respiratory system. You know, that's the laryngeal prominence, or the Adam's apple in males. So pretty much you can feel that, and then just right below it would be the thyroid gland. So that's where it's located. And if you isolate the larynx with the thyroid, look at the front, look at the back, and the anterior and then posterior, then we can see these two superiorly paired nodules and these two inferior ones. Those 4 are the parathyroid glands. So I'm just writing that they're located posteriorly. You really need to look at the picture to understand where they are. And so on the front, you see the larynx, trachea, and on the back, you see the pharynx, which is the muscle of the throat, and the esophagus. So these are constrictor muscles of your throat, and that's the esophagus. But really, we're talking about the endocrine structure, the parathyroid glands. So in terms of the histology, for example, I put an X where the thyroid tissue is, and this doesn't look like the picture we took, but the densely packed cells, the chief cells, that's the parathyroid. Okay, so you can see the follicle structures of the thyroid, how that's different. So they kind of look like little steaks, depending on how the colloid stains. Remember, I told you that the colloid was inactive thyroid hormone. So that's kind of how you can tell the difference. So what I'm writing is that thyroid tissue has this follicle structure. Has so the inner colloid, you can call that, is really, think of it as inactive thyroid hormone. It's called thyroglobulin. It's a protein. It's a globular-shaped protein. Cells can make protein, but what they can't synthesize is iodine. That's what I said yesterday. So they have to extract that from the blood. So what they do make, they just secrete it and keep it in the colloid. Now you also see parafollicular cells outside the follicle structure. You should be able to identify those. And, so here's kind of a simple picture of one follicle. Okay, you can see the cuboidal cells that surround it. Those are called follicle cells. Any cell outside the follicle that I may point to, you can call that a C cell or a parafollicular cell. So these parafollicular cells, as well as follicle cells, secrete different things. So for the thyroid tissue, I'm writing follicle cells secrete thyroid hormone. But for the parafollicular cells, they secrete the hormone calcitonin. So that's a different hormone. Okay, so the top of the figure, what I've been calling thyroid hormone, more specifically, it's T3, T4. We should note that. We'll talk more about T3, T4 later. T3 refers to 3 iodine molecules stuck to it, triiodothyronine. That's its full name. Triiodothyronine. T4. Thyroxine. So these are the more complete and accurate names of thyroid hormone. I'll talk more about these in a second. But in terms of calcitonin, I want to talk about that. It regulates blood calcium, as well as parafollicular cells. I'm sorry. Parafollicular cells secrete calcitonin, I misspoke. And the other kind of cell, the chief cells, Those are the main cell type of parathyroid gland. They secrete the hormone PTH, parathyroid hormone, because both of these regulate blood calcium. Calcitonin can lower the blood calcium, and PTH can raise blood calcium. So I have listed on the slide the mechanism, which I expect you to know, for calcitonin. So let's talk about that one first. So I'm talking about the mechanism of how calcitonin works. Look at the first point. You inhibit osteoclast activity on bone. So something you learned about the cell type you teach in 430. Okay, remember those osteoclasts, multinucleated cells, and they have this ruffled border. And from that, all these lytic chemicals will dissolve the inorganic matrix of bone, and it'll liberate calcium. And in doing that, you would raise blood calcium levels because you're leaching it from the bone. So basically, if you inhibit that cell, inhibit the osteoclast, by default, osteoblast activity is greater. So inhibit osteoclast activity, therefore osteoblast activity is greater. So what you have is this kind of net calcium deposition into bone. So hopefully you can kind of see how that lowers blood calcium, right? You're taking it out of the blood and depositing it into the bone. And so that kind of is the second bullet point. Promote calcium uptake into the bone because you're allowing the osteoblast activity to be increased. All right, so the other thing is just excrete it at the kidney. For kidneys, always think about what's going in and what's coming out. And so the arteries are always delivering blood to be filtered by the kidney. Blood's coming in. You filter things, and most things you want to reabsorb and keep in the bloodstream, nutrients like water and sodium and glucose and calcium. So things come in and things come out. The things you want to excrete go down the ureter into the urine. So I'll put lost to urine. And the physiology word is excretion. Okay, the kidney is the only organ that performs this function. Something is in your bloodstream, you filter it out, and you urinate it out in excretion. Okay, so if you want to just decrease the reabsorption and increase its excretion, That's a mechanism. This hormone can do that. So I'm just writing increased calcium excretion, and we'll move on. And that's how the calcitonin works. And here's a slide of how parathyroid hormone works. So what you can do is pay close attention to the, I know it may be hard to see in the back, there's like these red balls and blue-ish triangles. And so what they show you on this side, there's low calcium. And so you want to raise it. Calcium is very important for muscle function. Okay, so but let me just focus on how parathyroid hormone, when there's low calcium, there's not a lot of red balls. Parathyroid hormone is secreted and it acts on these locations. So how it raises blood calcium, it'll activate osteoclasts. So when you do that, you're going to raise calcium, so because you're going to increase the bone resorption. That's how we say break down bone. You're basically breaking the bone tissue down. You're liberating the calcium and putting it into the bloodstream. Secondly, you increase calcium reabsorption at the kidney. So again, you don't lose it to the urine. They use the term reabsorption. You absorb it again. You first absorb the calcium from your diet, from your gut, and the kidney filters it, then you reabsorb it again so you don't lose it to the urine. All right, so the third thing, through vitamin D, you'll increase calcium absorption from the gut, through vitamin D. So not a direct effect, but through vitamin D, increase calcium absorption your gut, your intestines. So dietary. So we're not doing half sheets today, but just to kind of get your brain greased for the test on Wednesday next week. See if you can answer that question. Take a careful consideration of each choice. I'll give you a minute. Did you choose A?
Yes.
A is correct, and again, multiple choice, just beefed up true and false. You have to consider each statement and be able to rule out. B doesn't even make sense. Okay, that just wouldn't happen. If you increase osteoclast activity, you should have more calcium in the blood. And I just told you it doesn't do that. If you don't lose it to the urine, you actually increase its reabsorption. So therefore, D can't be correct because C is incorrect. Do it for this one too. Think about it, commit yourself to an answer and write it down in your notes somewhere. So when you answer these questions, you have to remember the prime thing that will help you get it correct. Does it raise or lower calcium levels? This one lowers it. So once you're armed with that correct information, then you could probably get it right. Okay, which one of those makes sense? B made sense. I said you inhibit that cell, therefore osteoblasts, their activity outstrips them, so therefore B is correct. C and A don't make sense. Both of those would raise the calcium levels. Okay. So, again, always understand the mechanism. That's the physiology. All right, well, so this gland regulates calcium levels, but thyroid hormone is important for metabolism. Okay, so they kind of both go hand in hand, because metabolism is all the biochemical functions of all the cells. You need calcium for that, especially for muscle function. Calcium is also a second messenger system. But let's just kind of get the details down for T3 and T4, which I've been calling generically thyroid hormone. T4 is kind of more the inactive one. T3 is the active one. So basically, you just knock off one of the iodide molecules and it becomes active. What happens is, there's an enzyme, when it gets close to the target tissue, it'll knock off an iodine, convert it to T3, that's the active form, then it does its job. So this is the inactive form, but this is the form that's mostly secreted from follicle cells, from the thyroid gland. An enzyme converts T4 to T3 close to target tissues. And what's the target tissue? Most everything, okay? Because this cell boosts metabolism, so I'm thinking particularly muscle. The body's 80% muscle. Anyways, here's some factoids on the physiology, the effects of thyroid hormone. Boost metabolism. So because you're boosting metabolism, you're going to burn glucose. So this has an ability to indirectly lower blood glucose. I would say that's its main thing. Increase BMR, and as a result of that, you're going to lower blood glucose. I want to emphasize that because not too many hormones can have this effect on the bloodstream. Maybe this one and insulin. That's it. Hormonally speaking. Okay, so let's move on. It's lipid soluble. It has receptors everywhere in the cell, basically is what that's what's saying. And so again, you secrete thyroid hormone mostly, 90%, mostly in the form of T4. It's converted to T3, close to target tissues, like I say, skeletal and cardiac muscle, right? And there are others. So it's anterior pituitary dependent, as we know, because we talked about TSH, so it's under that control. So if T4 levels in the blood, if they fall, that's kind of like a stimulus for TSH release, and rising levels will negatively feedback and inhibit TSH. So we talked about that. So synthesis requires iodine. Okay, I have been mentioning that. Just to give you one clinical example. This patient has an enlarged, we call it a colloidal goiter. Maybe one cause could be iodine deficiency. Sometimes you see that in areas and regions of the world that are landlocked from, like, say, ocean water. Okay. So there's decreased salinity. And so these days, when we buy table salt, it's sodium iodide, and that'll help prevent it. But that's what happens. It's like you can't make it. So you just keep making the thyroglobulin. You'll just keep increasing the size of the colloid because TSH is going to keep stimulating the gland because there's no T3, T4 being secreted. So it's a goiter. And here's the physiology of how the follicle cells extract the iodide from the blood and make T3, T4. You can see most of it occurs kind of at the border of colloid follicle cell. Let's go through this step by step. Okay, so just orient yourself. This is a close-up view of a follicle. We have a follicle cell. Okay, we have the colloid on this side, and we have blood here where the iodide is, and that's pretty much where we begin. Well, we begin with thyroglobulin being synthesized by the cell. That's just a protein, and cells can make proteins. So it just does that. It will be under the influence of TSH. TSH pretty much stimulates every step of this diagram here. T3, T4, synthesis by follicle cells. Again, don't confuse these follicle cells with the follicle cells of the ovary. They have follicles too, but this is of the thyroid. It's all TSH dependent. So assume T4 levels dropping, TSH is released, stimulating these cells. First thing you're going to do is, number one says, basically make thyroglobulin. So how they draw the thyroglobulin, they draw just a little part of it, these little tyrosines. It's a part of the thyroglobulin. So I'll draw it like they do for now. Those little purple bars are the thyroglobulin, particularly the tyrosine amino acids. Tyrosines of THB is my abbreviation for thyroglobulin. That's step one. Just make it, and as you can see, it's kind of like exocytose into the colloid. Okay, so the other thing you got to do, you got to trap the iodide from the bloodstream. So that's step two over here. There's an enzyme that can do it. Trap iodide. Step two. So they use little green balls to symbolize iodide. You get that in the cell. You transfer it to the other side of the cell where there's an enzyme that can oxidize it to the correct form, iodide to iodine. So oxidize, you go from iodide, iodine. So they use kind of the green balls, and then they color them blue. Because after you've oxidized it, they want to symbolize that to you. And then what you could do is, step 4, you can attach them to the tyrosine amino acids of the thyroid globulin. You form MIT and DIT. Attach iodine to tyrosines, forming MIT and DIT. Now those are acronyms. MIT is monoiodothyronine, monoiodotyrosine, and diiodotyrosine. So mono means 1, di means 2. I never write it out because I only just ever call it MIT and DIT, just for simplicity. But just to draw it, it's basically a tyrosine bar, and if it's mono, that's 1. You just stick 1 on there. That's MIT. So I have a tyrosine, and you just put two of them on there. That's MIT and DIT. That's this step, and then what you got to do is you got to conjugate. And that's step 5. Iodinated tyrosines are linked. I'll just say link MIT and DIT to form T3 and or T4. Okay, so I'll draw T3 like, I'm going to draw it like they draw it, basically. So what's T3? It's a MIT plus a DIT, right? And then so T4 is DIT. Again, we're just drawing the iodinated tyrosine residues of the whole thing. And I'll show you the whole thing later, but I just want to draw it like they do. So you got your T3, T4, great. So endocytose the whole thing. That's step 6. So I'll go to the top of the board here.
Professor, remind me, T3 and T4 are enzymes, right?
They're thyroid hormone. That is correct.
Okay.
So I'm writing endocytose T3, T4. What you got to do is you got to kind of get it off that thyroid globulin. You got to clean it up. So in step 7, you fuse it with a lysosome, which has enzymes that can cleave the T3 and T4 off of thyroid globulin. Step 7. Fuse with lysosome, cleave off T3, T4 from thyroid globulin. So I abbreviated that THB before. That's the colloid. That's the stuff in the colloid. And so then you can secrete it. Okay? And they diffuse into the bloodstream. So cleave off, followed by inner blood. And done. So you made the cell made thyroglobulin, it trapped the iodine, it kind of went through all of that and basically put it back into the bloodstream there. Here's a kind of picture of the thyroglobulin, the globular structure, the red line, right? So you can see the tyrosines. Those are the amino acid residues that are iodinated, right? So here, well, you tell me, what do they make? Well, it says there. That's T4, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's a DIT, made T4. Done with that, I want to move on from the thyroid and the parathyroid to pancreas. Are there any questions on that?
On that last slide, it had tyrosine as separate from the thyroglobulin colloid.
That is correct. They only, they didn't include the red line. They just drew the little tyrosines, and they illustrated them as purple bars. So, just the difference in how they illustrated it. That's okay. Just understand it's T3, T4. That's the thyroid hormone. Move on to pancreas. So the anatomy is, it's behind the stomach. Pancreas is located in the space behind the stomach called lesser sac, or it's also called the omental bursa. Located in the space behind the stomach. Space is called lesser sac, or omental bursa. So what they did was they cut along this fat apron is called the greater omentum. It's attached to the greater curvature of the stomach, right? That's how it got its name. You cut along there to reflect the stomach back. You can see the tail of the pancreas right there. Okay? Here's a picture on the right which has more dissection, so you can get a clearer view. This is the first part of the intestine, it's the duodenum. Looks like this kind of inverted tobacco. That's kind of usually how books describe it. Well, anyways, it's kind of situated there for digestion. For endocrine purposes, we just want to take a look at the tissue and only focus on the structures that regulate blood sugar. And those are the pancreatic islets. I showed them to you on the slide, right? Here's a picture from a book, but here's a picture. It's similar to like I took, right? And you just kind of want to look and see what stands out. And there's a lot of different things that stand out. But what you're expected to identify is a clump of cells that have the endocrine function called the pancreatic islets, or islets of Langerhans. I see one here, and here, and here. Okay, those are the best examples. That's a blood vessel. Okay, these are ducts. Whenever you see a lumen, it's probably pancreatic duct and or a blood vessel. The duct is for digestion. It funnels a lot of pancreatic enzymes that help you digest your food. But again, we're concerned with just the islets. They have the endocrine function. The cells that are located within those tiny little islets, well, they're named here. You don't have to know the delta or F cell. Do know alpha beta. Okay. So the pancreatic islets, they have the endocrine structure, endocrine function. So the alpha cells, that's the alpha. They secrete glucagon. Beta cells insulin. These have the function of regulating blood sugar, glucose. So here's some details for the alpha cells, which secrete glucagon. It's a hyperglycemic agent, meaning it increases the blood glucose. So what's the mechanism? What's going to target liver and skeletal muscle? Those are the principal spots where you have glycogen stored. Okay. Targets: liver, muscle. Okay. So you tap your glycogen stores, and it does both glycogenolysis, gluconeogenesis. I defined those in the last lecture. It's both glycogenolysis as well as gluconeogenesis. That's all I'll say. That's principally how you're going to raise the blood sugar. Just break down the glycogen itself, or make new carb, right, out of non-carb sources, similar to cortisol. So the beta cells, they secrete the all-important insulin. It's a hypoglycemic agent. It increases blood glucose. And diabetes is a problem with insulin. Diabetes mellitus. Now there's type 1, type 2, T1D, T2D, T2D. The type 1, there's different causes. One cause, maybe you get a virus. Maybe the virus mimics the protein structure of beta cells. And your immune system responds to that virus by making maybe an antibody or T cell against it. The thing about it is, then you kind of attack your own B cells and you destroy them. Okay. And so the body has lost its ability to make insulin. So you're dependent upon injections probably. That's probably the main form of treatment. That represents a very small percentage of cases. More the lifestyle choices we make later in life may manifest in type 2 diabetes, which is insulin is there, it just doesn't work. Okay, you secrete boatloads of insulin because you have high blood glucose, and the tissues that are supposed to be insulin sensitive, namely skeletal muscle and adipose, I'll just put muscle adipose. That's just about most of your body weight. Okay. And when they don't respond to the insulin, the glucose levels stay high, and if you don't get treatment, your beta cells can just stop working. Then you're kind of just like a type 1 diabetic. All right. So, but with treatment, with hypoglycemic agents, most importantly with diet and exercise prescription, you can control the diabetes, because exercise, it really does improve your body's sensitivity to insulin. So I used to give a whole lecture on that. Now I'm just distilling it down. You should be aware. Type 1 diabetes, no insulin. Okay, if I can summarize. Type 2 diabetes, it's there but it's not working. Your body is insulin resistant. It used to be, they call it the type 1 diabetics. They noticed it in a small group of juvenile children. So it was called, juvenile onset diabetes. And they noticed a group of adults who were obese who had insulin, but it wasn't working. So they used to call this the adult onset. But now they just call it type 1, type 2. Okay. So insulin, when it works, you promote glucose uptake into the cell. Okay. In the cell, insulin promotes glucose utilization. So you use it. You either burn it for fuel or you store it. Okay. So you basically increase all your stores. Protein synthesis, triglyceride synthesis are also promoted. Insulin is your major anabolic hormone. I spent a little more time talking about insulin because of the problem with diabetes. Now, I don't know if you remember this slide. It's from Monday. Monday seems like it was like a year ago. It was only just past Monday. It's one of the first slides I showed you in lecture. We sat through about 4 or 5 hours of lecture, and it feels like a year ago. But anyways, this outlines insulin and the glucagon, okay, that we talked about. Now, to finish up, I made this slide. I used to just kind of ask this as a question. I was like, this is kind of hard. So I tabled it out myself, and I realized I couldn't make rhyme or reason. Here are all the hormones that I talked about: cortisol, growth hormone, insulin, glucagon, epi and norepi, epinephrine, norepinephrine, and the T3, T4, right? And so I just kind of tabled out what's their effect on our main forms of nutrition: the fat, the protein, and the glucose. In fact, those are the only things that give us nutrition. Those 3 things. Do they break it down? Do you increase it? Do they upper it? Make it go up? Make it go down? I just kind of tabled it out for you. That's for me to you a little gift. You just study that. Right? I think that's useful information to know. And again, don't confuse diabetes mellitus with diabetes insipidus. That's a problem with ADH. Okay, so we know what that does. This one causes water reabsorption from what organ? Kidney. Very good. So, why do you think they call it tasteless urine? Why does that mean tasteless urine? Because, well, if you don't have it, you increase urine output. Urine gets watery. It's like water, so tasteless urine versus sweet urine. Blood sugar remains high. Insulin is not working. It's there, but it's not working, or it's just not there. Okay, and then so it spills into the urine, and you really should never have sugar in your urine. So sweet urine. I heard that the ancient Egyptians used to taste the urine to test for diabetes. Fortunately, we have better ways of testing for it now. But anyways, just don't confuse those 2 diabetes. And we're done. So, hope you're having a good hair day. Today's picture day.